Welcome to your notes on evolution. Up until this point, we've talked a lot about evolution, but we haven't actually taken any notes on it. So today I want you to make sure that you have your notebooks out and your pencils and you're taking notes on the PowerPoint that's presented in front of you. So far we've made geologic timelines that show you the history of when Earth was created, when the first fish came about, when modern humans came about. Then we talked about radioactive decay and half-life, which was what gave us proof for when all these steps in history came about. And the last time I saw you, we talked about artificial selection, which, if you remember, is when humans artificially, select or pick certain traits. We looked at the cow and we selected traits that would best suit our needs as a hunter. So you ended up with a fat cow, you ended up with a cow that was really strong, and you ended up with a cow that could produce a lot of meat. Today we're going to focus on something called natural selection. And natural selection is similar, except instead of us as humans picking something, nature is deciding what would be the best. So the scientist that came up with this idea was Charles Darwin. And Darwin called this his theory of natural selection. You'll also see this called survival of the fittest. And you'll see in the PowerPoint that there are things that are underlined, there are things that are bold, and there are things that are in different colors. And those are the things that you want to focus on. You can also pause the video if you need more time to take notes. His idea of survival of the fittest means that there are certain traits that an organism has that makes it more likely to continue to live. In order for this to occur, there has to be natural variation. That means that there are different organisms. They are all within the same species, but there are some differences. If you look around the classroom, you can see some differences among the human species. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at the rabbits on the right side of the page. You'll notice that there are two colors of rabbits. There are white rabbits and there are brown rabbits. They have to compete for things that are limited. In an environment, things that are limited could be food, it could be space, it could be shelter, which is where they live, it could be water, and it could even be finding potential mates. If anyone remembers back to middle school, I think that's a great example of finding potential mates. It's a competition. Everyone wants the same boyfriend or the same girlfriend. That could be a problem in an environment as well. Organisms wouldn't be able to find someone to help pass on their genes to the next generation. So here we have lots of white bunnies and we have lots of brown bunnies. Let's place them all in a snowy environment. So snow is covering the ground and it's a very white covering. You'll notice that the white rabbit almost completely blends in. Here he is right here. But the brown rabbit stands out and the bobcat notices him easily. Bobcat is his predator. His goal is to eat rabbits. So he's going to be a lot more likely to eat the brown rabbit. Therefore, the white rabbit will be what we say as better adapted. We call it better adapted. That means the white rabbit has the trait that will make it more likely to survive. The brown rabbit, unfortunately, is going to be more likely to be caught by predators. As you can see by the picture, the bobcat has caught the brown rabbit. The white rabbits, however, are more likely to survive and then also reproduce. In Darwin's world, it isn't enough just to survive. The white rabbits then need to reproduce and pass on their genes. They need to be able to produce offspring or babies in order to be considered successful. As long as these rabbits live in a snowy environment, the white bunnies are going to do really well, brown bunnies are going to do not so well. So you'll see in successive generations, as more rabbits start having offspring, the number of white rabbits will continue to increase, and the number of brown rabbits will continue to decrease. I want you to think of the scenario here at the bottom. What happens if global warming occurs and all of the snow on the ground melts? What color is the ground going to be? The ground will be brown or green. So what color rabbit is going to be more likely to survive? The brown rabbit. The brown rabbit will camouflage into its environment, and the white rabbit will all of a sudden stand out. If that were to happen, the number of white rabbits would go down and the number of brown rabbits would increase. One of the most famous examples you'll see of evolution is giraffes, because giraffes are a very unique species. They are known for having a long neck. But giraffes didn't always have a long neck. Let's think about now how giraffes could have evolved to have this long neck. At the beginning, ancestors of modern giraffes have necks of different length. There's some that have short necks, some that have medium necks, and some that have long necks. Think about humans. There are some people who are 4 foot something, some people are 5 foot something, some people are 6 foot something, some people are 7 foot something. All different sizes. Giraffes eat leaves. That's their food source. So short giraffes were able to eat the leaves at the bottom of the trees. Medium neck giraffes were able to eat the leaves at the middle of the tree and at the bottom of the tree. And long neck giraffes were able to eat the top of the tree, the middle of the tree, and the bottom of the tree. Therefore, the long neck giraffes were able to reach the most food. Therefore, if you have an overpopulation of giraffes, you have lots and lots of giraffes, and there's not enough food for everyone, the longer necks would be better able to reach the food than the shorter necks. As a result, the long-necked giraffes are going to be more likely to survive because they have food and the other ones do not. And once they survive, they are going to, as it says, produce more high-quality offspring. That means they're going to survive and pass their long neck trait down to their babies. This increases the chances of the long neck characteristic, which is what we call an adaptive trait, being passed on to future generations. Because the long necks are more likely to survive, therefore they're more likely to reproduce, and the next generation will have more long neck giraffes. You may remember this example from middle school. Darwin spent a lot of his time studying finches, which is a kind of bird, in the Galapagos Islands. He did a lot of measurements, and he noticed that there were different finches. They differed mainly in their types of beak. So this finch here has a big, strong beak. It's suitable for crushing up seeds. Therefore, that's what that bird would eat. This next finch, you'll notice, has a long, pointy beak. It looks very different than the finch on the top. As a result, it's able to eat insects that are stuck in little holes. It's able to dig deep in the holes and pick out the insects. Therefore, these two finches are not competing for the same food source. Darwin took measurements of beak size, he watched what they ate, he took very detailed notes, and was able to prove that this was true. He thought that all finches probably evolved from one type of finch. So originally, these two finches would have been very similar. But because food is a scarce quantity, there isn't enough food for every bird, there was natural variation, so some sort of mutation or something that led to different beak types, and they both survived because they were able to avoid competition. That's the key phrase from this slide. Having different beaks allowed these finches to avoid competition. Therefore, they both survive and they both pass on their genes to their offspring. The problem with Darwin's theory is that he was ahead of his time. Like I said, he was working on this in the middle 1800s, so like 1850-ish. The problem was we didn't have any evidence of DNA at that point. Now we know the reason why babies look like their parents is because they get half of their DNA from mom and half of their DNA from dad. Darwin didn't have this evidence to support anything he was saying. He was trying to convince everyone that the finches passed on their beak shape to their offspring, but he didn't have any concrete proof to show how they passed on their traits. As a result, scientists of his era, which is called the Victorian era, did not believe Darwin. They thought he was crazy. They said that in order for his ideas to work, Earth needed to be at least millions of years old. We now know that Earth is over 4.6 billion years old and that Darwin was correct. But at this time, people didn't think Earth was more than a few thousand years old, at most. Also, scientists didn't know much about the fossils, therefore they were unable to explain much about the fossils. We now know about DNA, and we use DNA as proof of evolution. We have the ability to analyze DNA and to compare DNA from one organism to another. Here's a human. We can compare humans' DNA to the DNA of a chimpanzee and notice that it is about 98% identical. I want you to keep in mind that for this, chimpanzees and apes are the same thing. However, monkeys, gorillas, and orangutans are different species. We are most similar to apes. Therefore, we are between 98 and 99% similar to those organisms. If it seems crazy that we can be that similar but look so different, know that you are 99.9% identical to every other person in the room right now. Every human differs in their DNA by about 0.1%. That 0.1% shows you just how much it matters, because you can see how different you all are. Knowing that humans and chimpanzees are very close in their DNA sequence shows us that it's been a relatively short period of time since we evolved. Okay? We are most similar to them in our DNA, therefore we more recently split apart from them and became a different species. The last example I'm going to talk about today is the peppered moths. You probably all know what moths are. People like to describe them as ugly butterflies. They can be white, they could be black, they could be brown, gray, off-white. There's not a whole lot of color to them. If you've already talked about the Industrial Revolution in history class, you know that during the Industrial Revolution there were a lot of factories built. The factories built was great because it produced a lot of goods for us that we didn't have before, but it also produced a lot of pollution. That pollution was in the form of smoke, and the smoke covered everything around the factories. Therefore, the trees that the moths rested on were covered with a darker smoke. When the trees were covered with the darker smoke, the dark peppered moths, the dark black or the dark gray peppered moths, were more likely to succeed. Therefore, the number of dark moths increased and the number of white moths decreased. Since then, we've cleaned up our cities a little bit. We still have lots of factories, but we have ways to regulate the amount of smoke that they give off. As a result, the color of the trees is lighter. What happened to the population of peppered moths was that the lighter moths were now more likely to survive and reproduce because they are more hidden on a light tree. Therefore, the number of white moths has increased, where the number of brown moths or black moths has decreased. That's all I have for you today. You're now going to use the information to help work on other work.